Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kidlit Social. I'm Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. Just very quick, for those of you who are new to us, we've been in business for 32 years, and our sort of flagship product is our newsletter, Children's Book Insider. We have lots of other stuff too, but that's what we're known for. And every month we have a special Above the Slush Pile submission opportunity for our subscribers, where an editor gives you an opportunity to submit. Often they are closed to submissions otherwise. The July issue has an opportunity from Doubleday, from Frances Gilbert at Doubleday Books for Young Readers, and she is taking picture book submissions from us, from our subscribers. So it's only good through the month of July. If you are not a subscriber and you really want to get in on that, here's how you do it. You can go to this link here, bit.ly// join-CBI, or you can point your phone at that QR code on screen right now. Take a picture and it'll take you right there. I just want to make sure you know about that in case you have a picture book manuscript ready to go and you want an opportunity to submit it to Doubleday. The submission link to the form we use is inside the newsletter. Okay. Celebrate, my favorite part of every social, and I have more celebrates this month than ever before. This is our record-breaking celebrate. Phyllis Schwartz announces that her new picture book, When Mom Feels Great, Then We Do Too, will be published by Acorn Publishing on September 23rd, and it is available for pre-order on July 23rd. She writes, I use humor and optimism to infuse this upbeat, rhyming exploration of how an extended family can cooperate and work together to bring positive and healing results to a sick mom. As a mom who has lived through a similar experience, I know how important it is to engage all family members in a productive way and let the fun and love chase away the mystery and fear of illness. So Phyllis, congrats on that. I love the cover and I wish you the best of luck with this really important book. Okay, Rebecca Garden Livington writes, my debut picture book, Brainstorm, illustrated by the wonderful Kate Cromreef and published by Sleeping Bear Press, has its book birthday on August 3rd. Brainstorm is targeted to children in grades K to 3 who are beginning to learn how to shape and sharpen their idea generation and storytelling skills. It's actually a story, but it incorporates all these skills. And it has a glossary and writing prompts and lots of great info for parents, teachers, and librarians. So you can go to her website, RebeccaGardenLevington.com, to get more of that information or to order a signed copy. And congrats, Rebecca, that looks wonderful. Shelley Pollux, Shelley's here tonight. Her new book comes out August 2nd from Tilbury House Publishers. Lion Lights is the true story of Richard Tuweri. I hope I said his name right. A young Maasai living in Kenya. She's co-authoring this book with Richard, which is about how he, as a small child, invented a way to protect his family's cows from hungry lions. His invention is now being used around the world to protect other animals from predators. And her hope is that Lion Lights will inspire children everywhere to realize that they too can do amazing things. Now that sounds like an amazing book and a story that needed to be told. So congrats, Shelley, on that. That's wonderful. And Kathleen Quinton writes, this year I have self-published a teen confidence building journal, Strength Becomes You, Teen Journal. She also previously self-published a 3-part series called The Adventures of Quint the Bookmobile and has recently co-authored a children's book with 2 friends for which they are looking for an agent or publisher. Kathleen, you've been busy. Congrats on that. Mary Blackwell writes, in January, my debut middle grade novel, The Worry Knot, was released from Immortal Works Press. And this month, my 4 books in a nonfiction series called Awesome Disgusting Careers is available from Black Rabbit Books, an imprint of the Creative Company. Congrats, Mary. That's 2 wonderful announcements. And that nonfiction series looks really super interesting. I know my son would have loved that when he was that age. And finally, Anne Harrell announces that she has 2 upcoming picture books from Clavis Books, Pete's First Playdate, which publishes in October, and Simple Gifts, coming out in fall 2023. Congratulations, everybody. This is amazing. And I love it that we're doing this on a night when I have 2 librarians as guests, so they get to preview all of your new books. Isn't that wonderful? So I want to hear your good news. Email me at mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and I will feature you on a future Kidlit social. And it doesn't have to be a publication. Any good news on your journey is wonderful. We want to hear about it and we want to celebrate it with you. And I have something to celebrate. Tomorrow, we are hosting this amazing webinar, The Secrets of Writing a Page Turner, Mastering the Unstoppable Force of Narrative Tension, led by Lola Schaefer, who has written over 275 books, so she knows what she's talking about. And it's going to apply to picture books through young adult. And this is a really, really important webinar, and I've seen her slides, and it's going to be truly amazing. So tomorrow it's live at 6 p.m. And if you're watching this on replay, tomorrow I am referring to is Wednesday, July 20th. So if you're watching it after that, I'm sorry you missed it. But we will have it on our writingblueprints.com site. You can still buy the replay. But if you register live, you save $20. So here's how you reserve your spot: bit.ly/page turn 22. The link is down here at the bottom. It'll also go out with the replay. And we will send you the recording if you can't make it live. So this is awesome. Please don't miss it. So links of interest, I always give you some sort of writing link, but this one today is very near and dear to my heart. So I really wanted to share this with you. Alithia's Art Angels is a website that our friend, author illustrator Violet LeMay, who's been on social, helped build. And Alithia is one of the children who was killed in the Uvalde, Texas school shooting. And she dreamed of being an artist, and she dreamed of having her work presented online on a website for the world to see. And so Violet helped Alithia's parents build this website, and it is a place for all young artists up to age 18 can send in their work, and it will be showcased on this website. And Violet is helping to curate and run it. And they have contests where young artists can win gift certificates to buy art supplies. And it's just celebrating young artists. And her parents said what would make them the most happy is to know that Alithia's dream of sharing her art with the world was being fulfilled through other young artists. So if you know young artists, please spread the word to them. The site is called alithiasartangels.com. And I have a link to Violet wrote a really great blog post about how she got involved with this. And again, these links will go out with the replay. So please spread the word to all the young artists you know. Okay, now I get to introduce my wonderful guests. Carolyn Foote and Becky Calzada, two Texas school librarians, and founders of Freedom Fighters, along with librarian Nancy Jo Lambert. Freedom Fighters is a grassroots advocacy group meant to provide support for librarians, teachers, students, and authors, and to provide resources to fight against censorship. Freedom Fighters is the recipient of the 2022 American Association of School Librarians Intellectual Freedom Award and the 2021 Robert B. Downs Intellectual Freedom Award. So both of my guests have tremendous credentials. I'm going to try to go, just give you a few highlights here, because if I list both of your credentials, we'll be here all night. So Becky is the district library coordinator in the Leander Independent School District, which is northwest of Austin. and has been selected to many groups. She's won many awards from the ALA and other groups on her advocacy. And she's past chair for the Texas Association of School Librarians. And you can see her Twitter account there. You can follow her. Carolyn is a retired and rewired, I love that, 39-year educator and librarian in Austin, Texas. And her work has been recognized by the American Association of School Libraries, Library Collaboration Award, the White House Champions of Change, and many other organizations. So these women know what they're talking about. And I am really, really thrilled to have you both on my Kidlit social here tonight. And my dog just came in because she wants to hear you too. So she's here as well. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us. We're really honored to be here.
Sure. Now, both of you have such a tremendous level of experience in the school and library area. And I presume in your long careers that you have faced pressure in the past to keep books out of the hands of certain books out of your library or away from young readers. And what was it? What was the tipping point that finally inspired you to create Freedom Fighters in 2021?
Well, I think although we've both been librarians a long time, book challenges typically are few and far between. And we were seeing a gradual uptick in them in spring of 2021. But I think what drew this to a head was probably some of you are aware that a representative in Texas released a list of 800 book titles asking districts if they own them and any other books that might cause shame or guilt. And we noticed, the library community noticed right away that only certain titles were on this list. And so we were concerned. And then our governor kind of doubled down on that here in Texas. And we felt like we wanted to give a positive response that supported the work of librarians, authors, and supported students in having access. But initially, we were really just doing a grassroots event, which Becky can talk about, of a Twitter takeover.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. And I think the thing too is all we kept hearing was negative things about books. At that time, we also had a lot of people going to school board meetings and reading, stringing together pieces of a book, different books and different titles. And of course, when you take things out of context, you don't, get the whole, and you don't get to appreciate the whole of the story. And so one of the things that was important to Carolyn and I is that, we just really wanted to provide an opportunity for people to highlight how books had made a positive impact on their lives. And so it just started with a text message between her and I, saying, what do you think about maybe us sharing books that we love that have made an impact and encourage others to join in. And so we compiled the documentation to share with our friends, with our Twitter connections, with authors, publishers, and on November 4th, we just sort of watched it start slowly in the wee hours of the morning and got to see it trend 6th and 7th all day long. And at that time, Carolyn was in California on vacation. I was working, and so was Nancy Jo Lambert. And so I didn't do much because I was working, because I was, trying to keep separate the two. But it was just really an amazing thing to watch so many people sharing new books that have just been something that was close to their heart, years ago, and the impact that they'd have. And it was, students, it was, authors. It was just, so many people. And we noticed also too, that it just gave people a lot of hope.
Yes.
Which is something that had been missing up until that point.
Definitely.
And so that compelled our journey to create a Twitter account of our own, a website, and what ultimately kind of became a movement. After we had 13,000 tweets that day, we figured there was a lot of interest in people supporting diverse books and authors. And
Absolutely. So there's a couple of interesting things that have come out of these objections. And by the way, when we send out the replay, we're going to send a link to that list of 800 books, which is very interesting to scroll through. But some of when you read about this and you read about the objections people have, they say we want to keep pornographic books out of children's school library shelves. Where did that come from? Because when you scroll through this list, there are a lot of issues talked about, but where do people grasp the whole pornographic issue?
I think, unfortunately, what's happened is this list did focus in more on books about race and racism, but also books about LGBTQ characters and concepts. And so the word explicit is sometimes being used for titles with more mature content at the high school level. And
Right.
sometimes it's being used for just a relationship, a LGBTQ relationship that is not explicit at all. And so I consider it sort of a Trojan horse, because if you want to get people worked up about, book censorship or books that are available in the library, then calling out mature titles becomes like an easy way to do that. But then we've seen it spread across the country to include all sorts of titles. I mean, I'm sure most of the people here are aware that things like Mouse about the Holocaust. A couple of weeks ago, it was a book about Japanese internment camps. It's sort of become all encompassing. It was a picture book about seahorses in Tennessee. So it's become everything under the sun that someone might have an objection to. So,
and it's included books that maybe are more information, nonfiction. So one of the things that was really interesting on that list included books about abortion, what it was, so maybe a student might need that for a research paper. It could also be about just reproduction. And so it was just interesting. There were some databases that were targeted too. So when you look at that list, you could tell it was very topic based. And that seemed to, again, we don't know where the list originated from, but again, it just interesting, the different topic points that it covered, the range.
I noticed that on the list, I was scrolling through it, there were a lot of books published by educational publishers, and you could tell they were written to help kids with research papers. And there was one on abortion, pro and con. So it was showing both sides of the issue. There were books on the Trail of Tears, the Native American history. And I thought, this makes sense. And getting back to the sexuality, there were, even when I was in high school, which is a long time ago, there were young adult novels that had characters having sex in it. And so you wonder if it's the LGBTQ sex that is making people uncomfortable. And something you said, Carolyn, and it's in this definition that Representative Matt Krause used, the criteria is material that might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race, sex, or convey that, and on and on and on. So it had to do with that discomfort. And I was thinking, well, who's actually uncomfortable here?
right.
Because we know, especially when you get to high school, students, if they don't see themselves represented, especially in terms of gender identity, sexual identity, when they're figuring all this out, it leads to suicide, self-harm, depression. And if you're telling them you are wrong, we're going to take these books away because we're uncomfortable with who you are, that, in my opinion, is not a good thing. I'm just giving my opinion here, so I want to let you all talk.
But I think you speak to the fact that we want everybody to feel like they belong. Everybody's stories matter, and one of the things that's been really special to see in publishing the last 5 to 6 years is that better representation. I think back, and I tell this to Carolyn all the time. I was born in Deep South Texas. And I had a lot of favorite books, and a lot of them featured, white girls. Maybe there was snow. There was never snow where I lived. I mean, things like that. And so, when do I get to see myself? So one of the first books that I saw myself in was the book Too Many Tamales, because I grew up, making those. And so, and that's not a very, I mean, that's not an super old book, but I mean,
Right.
I was a lot older when that came out too. I think I was a teacher at the time. And so that just speaks to, how important it is, and that it's really great to see that authors are really making an effort to write the stories that our kids want to hear about. And they're telling their own stories too, because I think
Yes.
many of our students can connect to the stories of their lived experiences too.
I think, if our goal is to, as librarians anyway, and educators, is to get students interested in reading, that seeing books on the shelf that do validate their experience, especially for more reluctant readers or inexperienced readers, that has an impact on them feeling like they belong in the school and belong in the library. And I think that's what drove us to this work in the beginning, is feeling the harm that this was going to do to students of color and LGBTQ students, or any student who was different, whose ideas might be challenged. And in fact, it has been playing out that way. And so it's been very distressing to us as educators first, librarians second.
Sure.
See
Sure.
that.
Absolutely. And so I'm sure as librarians, you're, the main thrust of your job is to make literature available to children if you're a school librarian, or to the public if you're a public librarian. Is there ever a situation, and I'm speaking specifically for schools here, where it's appropriate to keep a book away from certain kids? Can you ever think of a situation where that might be true? Or to restrict a child's access? That's what I'm trying to say.
Philosophically, librarians believe that students have, the right to have access to materials and to explore what they need or what interests them. I've had the occasional case when I was a practicing librarian that a student, for developmental reasons, might have been interested in something beyond their years,
Sure.
and so we were guiding them towards something more fitting. But it's hard when you have libraries that run K-8 or K-6,
Right. Yes.
12 or 9-12, because obviously you have a lot of different levels, just like at the public library, because it's open to everyone. They don't have barriers between one section and another. And so, it's kind of a perennial issue with bookstores as well. And so it's.
But on that token though, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, on that token though, too, we have to think and remember that the library space is a space of voluntary inquiry. And so no child will ever be forced to check out a book, or shouldn't be. The only time I would see us restricting access to a book is because a parent said, I don't want my child to check out, insert the kind of book, the subject matter, the genre, the format, whatever. If librarians are putting books, and putting them on a restricted area, maybe they don't belong there in the first place, because that's a form of censorship too. So I think it's thinking through that lens. We all, as librarians, as school librarians, have policies to follow that are set by our school boards. And so it outlines the things that we should be looking at. And if we are outside those parameters, we probably shouldn't have them in the library.
Right. So if a parent does have an objection to a certain book, what are the appropriate channels that they should go through to express that?
Typically in most districts, the districts encourage informal conversations with the principal and librarian. That is an informal challenge. And often in the past, there was a resolution through that sort of process. Unfortunately, right now, that's sort of being bypassed, and more strong tactics are being used. But sometimes in that process, either we want to customize what each child needs. So that process helps us understand what that family wants for their child. And there's things like in library checkout software, you can put a note or some sort of note that indicates what the parent prefers for that child or what the child prefers. So there are strategies that librarians can take. You have to think about too, if you're a librarian in a school, a lot of the regular students who come use the library, and you develop a relationship with that parent if they've taken the time to come talk to you about their concerns about what their child reads. And so you can provide that sort of guidance. I mean, that's something we're trained for. And so hopefully that kind of conversation can take place, but parents can file a formal challenge, read the book, file a form, all of that as well.
I think the ultimate goal is that we want to be a partner with parents, just like the teacher, partners with that teacher in the classroom with the parent, excuse me. A librarian wants to be a partner too. And so many parents don't realize that at least in Texas, a librarian is a certified teacher too. So they have teaching experience too, and they're just in a larger classroom that serves all students. So taking the time, as you get ready to start school, go to open house, getting to know the librarian, asking questions about, how do you do this and processes, that sort of thing. That we welcome that. I think it's just, it's an opportunity to partner and share, needs, questions, and that kind of thing too.
Right. I think a lot of parents don't even know that they can come talk to you and say, I really don't want my kid reading this book, but they don't have to ban it for everybody. And knowing that there's that option, I think is really important, because parents, I think, have a right to monitor what their kids read. And like you said, you want to be partners with parents in that.
Yes. Every parent reserves the right to determine what their child can and can't read. That is not something we're going to argue about. It's the restriction, one parent demanding that all do not need to have. That's a very different conversation. And so that is actually a part of our school board policy in Texas. And I know it probably is in lots of other places too. So
yeah.
And I think the thing is, right now we're kind of in an unusual situation in that it's become a politicized atmosphere, and education shouldn't be politicized, but it has become part of this political conversation. And so sometimes some of the complaints are coming from people that don't have children in the school or aren't even in the school district, or they're challenging materials the school doesn't even own. So it's kind of an unusual heated situation right now, which adds to the challenge of our desire to work as partners with parents, and for them to, I think the political pressure has sort of tried to pit parents against schools and parents against, teachers and librarians, as sort of not looking out for their child's best interest. And we all care about their child becoming a better reader and having a good literary experience. So I think that's really an unfortunate outcome of these times right now.
Right. Well, and that's what I was going to ask. It seems like, at least when I was starting in publishing in high school myself, if there were any books that were being questioned, it was from the parents. They tended to come in and say, I don't think this book should be in the school. And then there'd be a discussion between the teachers, the principal, the parents, etc. It feels now like the government wants to get involved, and it's these lawmakers who are not trained teachers, who don't understand the curriculum or the books that you have in the library, who don't know the kids the way you do, and are, as you said, they're politicizing this. And it feels like they're trying to use schools and libraries as a wedge in some bigger fight. Do you get a sense for that? And how is this affecting your jobs? Do you feel like your jobs are in jeopardy or do other librarians that you've talked to feel that way?
I think it's created a very difficult environment for librarians and for teachers in many states and cities. And, because we're all just interested in catching kids up after the pandemic and getting back on track after COVID and making sure we have enough staff, I know Becky can speak to that. And so it's made it a very difficult experience. And we try to take every opportunity we can to remind parents that we want to partner with them, that we, who librarians are, that we do book fairs, we do puppet shows, we teach kids how to do research and use databases. We're not some
Sure.
nefarious characters, but Becky can speak to the challenging environment it's created inside schools.
Yes, and for us, it's been misinformation that's shared, like Carolyn said, maybe I'll give you an example. Lawn Boy is a title that's been in the news across the country in terms of being challenged. And it was shared at a school board meeting that it was an elementary school. Well, there is a Lawn Boy title in the elementary library, all of our elementary libraries, by Gary Paulson. Very popular, very funny book.
Yeah.
But it's that rush to share, and maybe a video going viral or, becoming a flashpoint for like, how can they do this? And instead, what we really want is parents to pause and say, who's the author? Have you talked to school? Do they even own the book? That sort of thing. And I think the other thing too is that when you have officials, encouraging behaviors like reporting to them, that's another layer that emboldens people sometimes. And so I've had some of a librarian that's been threatened to be reported to the governor or to an agency, when they didn't even purchase the book, they didn't even know the book was there, they were like a brand new hire. And that's the kind of thing that scares a person out of not wanting to be in an incredible profession,
Yes.
I think the thing is that our libraries, offer something for everybody, and we, even in our very, well-funded district, we have a lot of book deserts. And so the school library is the only place and space for kids to have access to have books, over the summer or during the school year. And so without having to go pay at a public library. And so I think, that could be viewed as a threat, I guess, because, we have different books for different people. And I don't know, we've even had conversations about just the fact that public schools are spaces that, all kids can come and have a good, strong education. And so I think there are those that maybe feel threatened by a lot of that, but I think, again, what happens and what's the outcome is that it takes professionals away from the important work of educating kids. Of, partnering with parents and building community within our schools. And unfortunately, another effect too is maybe the creation of guidelines that while well-intentioned, maybe create additional work or restrict the purchase of materials and that kind of thing too, which is, we know of several libraries and school districts that have not purchased a book since last summer. And that's just devastating to hear, because again, the school library might be the only place, or even the public library might be the only place that people are getting access to books. And so it's definitely something that undermines the greater work, or the greater important work.
That's so true. So what are some of the most pressing issues that you are facing right now? We talked about LGBTQ and probably books that deal with race. Are there other ones that you're seeing a lot of objections? Does it tend to follow whatever's happening in politics?
I think, there's almost like a playbook, and because of Facebook, something will pop up somewhere and then it pops up in another state or a city nearby or so on. So I think the social media component inflaming things over and over again is something that's certainly difficult. I see one really pressing issue facing us this fall is many states implemented laws last spring around what we call educational gag laws, or teaching divisive concepts, by which they mean something about race or racism, or how sex education is covered in schools. And so we're already starting to see that in Florida. Schools just trying to figure out how to navigate this. Like, how do you have a library, or how do you teach books in a classroom, or how do you teach social studies when there's certain, like, these gaps that you have to have, or how are you going to navigate this? Does it include libraries or not? Does it include what the teacher has in the classroom on the classroom shelves? And so that is a real worry for the fall, is how, because the laws are so vague and people are filing lawsuits already. And so it's just going to be very difficult. And then I think another pressing issue is really continuing to increase public awareness around all of this, because you'd be surprised how many people, upon hearing, I mean, I talked to a reporter last week for a mainstream publication. They're like, oh my God, this is horrible. I had no idea this was going on. And so it just takes constantly sharing with people and reiterating what's happening and reiterating what the danger is, because where does it stop? It's a slippery slope when you start removing titles. And now that there's thousands of titles that have been challenged around the country, thousands of different titles, it's just creating this atmosphere like this is the status quo, this is what you're supposed to do. And so combating it's even more difficult. And then the credibility of librarians and teachers that's been damaged, of school boards, how to repair that in the community, how to remind people of who authors really are, who teachers, librarians really are, who school board members really are there for. I think those are all challenges that I'm concerned about going forward.
And the irony in all that is that, ALA, the American Library Association, conducted a bipartisan poll last fall, and 71% of voters said that we're against book bans. And so, what we know is that there is a small but very vocal minority that's assembled. And so it's, one of the things that I think this provides an opportunity for is for, people to band together. And so there are organizations like United Against Book Bans, the organization, the grassroots effort for the ALA, or in Texas, Texans for the Right to Read, that authors can get connected to, publishers, anybody, parents, families, can get involved and get engaged, and they have, opportunities for people to learn about how to engage in these conversations, reach out to your school board, that kind of thing. Because we all need to be working together instead of all these little micro communities doing little things. And so, that's important that we're all kind of unified.
Absolutely.
Right. And I am starting to see more the last month that I'm feeling a little more hope, because I've seen, during June, during Pride Month, there were a lot of attacks on public libraries, which some of you may have seen in the news, and on collections in public libraries, since most schools were closed already for the summer. And but I saw a story in Arlington, Texas, where parents lined up to prevent Proud Boys from coming in and disrupting a program. And I've seen student groups starting to engage, and so I'm feeling like it's starting to enter people's consciousness that this is not the America that we fought for.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so I think that it takes that to turn the tide. And as Becky said, just unity among organizations. Pen America is another one, some of the publishers just coming together so that we're doing cohesive work together.
Well, and, our audience here are mainly people who write for children and teens, or are author illustrators, or who are connected to the publishing industry in some way. So their very livelihood depends on you being able to get their books into the hands of their readers. And so this should be a very personal issue for them. And I had author Chris Barton on a couple weeks ago. You probably know him. He's a Austin author. And he made some really good points, because he was talking about some of these issues and how it's important that we all start just showing up, going to town halls, going to school board meetings, and just listening to what they're talking about, making comments, voicing your opinion. Having the presence there, I think, is so important, because you're right. If they feel like nobody's paying attention, then things happen. And if you start showing up and saying, no, wait a minute, that's not what we want, and there's more of us than you, they've got to start listening. And this is not just a Texas problem. That's the other thing we all have to remember. Texas is kind of ground zero, and it's the one we all hear about, but this can happen anywhere. And so it's so important for everyone to remain aware and supportive. So how can authors especially help you? And let's start with, this is a many-pronged question here. So I want to start with, if an author is coming into your library to do a presentation or into your school, and they have a book that might be considered controversial, what are the steps? Do they discuss it ahead of time with you? Do they tell you, look, this is what I want to talk about? I mean, what are the parameters of that, first of all?
I'll let Becky take that, but I know that that's a situation authors are already facing.
Yeah. So I think, what typically happens is a librarian will reach out to an author and invite them to come into their space. And so just by nature of the fact that a librarian is inviting a specific author, they know all the books that they have. And so if something happens, it's not probably because the librarian didn't want or didn't know about the book. A lot of times it's because it comes to the attention of a parent and they see a book that they feel in their eyes is problematic. I think the greater conversation is how can librarians proactively prepare and by explaining the purpose of the program with their principal, explaining what the goals are and intentions of that program with families, and then also just being, just like with anything else, if a parent doesn't want their child to attend, that's okay. But that one parent shouldn't cause that whole event to be canceled. Right. And so, when librarians take the time to create an event like this, I mean, they want to hear authors talking about their writing and the stories that they've written. Kids want to hear from an author and their experience because they've got connections with that book. There's just so much preparation that happens, to lay the groundwork for all that. And so, in terms of preparation, I think that's the thing. And but yes, I have heard that happen. And unfortunately, I think some of the decisions that are made regarding the cancellation of something, through my lens, sometimes is a little more reactive, and which is disappointing. But I also think too, a lot of times, and what I see too, is many authors have in their contracts, if there's a cancellation, there's usually some sort of protocol, because it could not necessarily be canceled just because of this. I mean, there could be a weather concern and stuff. So sometimes building that into a part of your agreements, I think, is something that's important to do, just because you're trying to make money too, Sure. And I don't think any librarian wants to deliberately cancel something, but we also don't know, when the pandemic happened, we had to shift and do different things. If there's a storm, we have to shift and do different things. And so building in for those kinds of situations, I think, is a proactive way to protect yourself as an author. And then I think just being transparent about the goals of your program, and this is what you're going to do, because I know many authors that have different kinds of programs. And so when they have this kind of program, they highlight just these books. And because, I mean, they're just, everybody's so different. So I think just thinking about those kinds of things is really critical too.
And I think as an author, just deciding, so if I'm faced with, just thinking about it ahead of time. So if I'm faced with a situation where I'm asked to talk about one book and not a different book, or where the district's imposing all these rules on me and I feel like it's prejudicial in some way, do I, as an author, ethically want to come into that school and serve those children with the different content, or do I ethically want to call the district out and say, no, I'm not going to do that? I think it's helpful as authors to think about that ahead of time. So if you face a situation, you aren't then in the middle of all that angst and trying to make those decisions, that you're already mentally prepared.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard, I know. And I think I've spoken to a couple of authors, maybe not that's happened to them, but they've kind of been on the edges and seen it happen. And yet they've received an invitation and wonder, should I go or not? Because they've heard of this, because everybody's got different perspectives. And in this one particular author I was thinking about, their perspective was like, well, I don't necessarily agree with what happened to that person. I'm thinking about the kids. are we all going to align and maybe punish the district? Are we all going to punish all those kids, for maybe a few parents? So it's just, it's hard. It's a hard situation. It's a difficult situation. So yeah, thinking about that ahead of time probably helps.
That's great. And then I had another question in my head that just went right out.
I do. Can I share one more thing too, though?
Sure.
What we know about the climate is that, there are certain books that are being targeted. And one of the things that I think that has been super helpful for our librarians, if a book has been formally challenged, is some of the authors of those challenged books have either written something on their blog about the reason I wrote this book, the background, the why. Super helpful. And we've been allowed to bring those into our reconsideration meetings, because that is a first person point of view, the perspective of that author that's writing specifically towards that book. So that could be helpful. I know Nikki Grimes has done a lot of work in that area, because she's had several books targeted. And so there's other authors that do that. But I mean, I'm obviously not telling every author to do that. But I mean, if you feel like that could be helpful, some will just write a personal message. I've had a librarian that just reached out because an author didn't have anything and just said, well, here's what I was thinking. And it was just literally like a little Instagram message that she pulled and shared with the committee. So it doesn't have to be anything like expensively large, but I think too, that doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
If you feel moved to do something like that.
And I want to tag on to that, because think you were asking that earlier. A thing that authors can do also is, authors are eloquent writers, right? They're writers. And letters to the editor about the issue in local communities, letters to the editor of big papers, letters to school boards, as Becky said, letters in support of other authors, letters published on your blog. They carry weight because you're an author. And librarians can't always speak out when stuff like this is going on. In fact, almost always they can't speak out. The information can get leaked out. Sometimes it gets leaked out through people like us. But so the more authors can share what's actually happening with their communities, the better. And anyway, so that would be helpful, very helpful.
That's very good. And you want to share it with the community beyond Kidlit, because other people who are writers are probably going to already agree with you, and you want to share it with
that preaching to the choir.
Exactly.
It may be the local paper in that town where it's happening. It may be,
it could be citizens' comments at a school board meeting.
Absolutely. Okay. I want to remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll get to those in just a second. I just have a couple more questions, and then we'll get to yours. I saw some going by in the chat box, and I will lose them if you keep them there. What else? You have some great resources on your website that people can use to help spread the word about what you're doing. And you have Twitter, hashtag, and how best can people help spread the word about you and what you're doing?
Well, certainly sharing our website. We have a whole how-to page now, which says how to write a letter to an editor, how to speak at a school board meeting. There's a how-to for students. Just sharing that with people that you talk to is helpful. And sharing Unite Against Book Bans website and social media, because they're always looking for more and more partners. Following our Twitter account, and we have an Instagram account now. Our hashtag is capital F, capital R, EADOM. So a lot of people use that on social media, and we track it. So even if you don't tag us, we'll see it if it's got that hashtag on it, and we can repost that content. So those are all ways to reach us.
Excellent. Okay.
And those resources, they already have talking points of, how to write these things. United Against Book Bans specifically has talking points that are not for the librarian, that are for anybody that's not a librarian, because, we recognize, and they recognize too, that what do I say? So you can talk about how, every parent reserves the right to choose for their child, but not the entire school district. Those kinds of talking points that help make it easier to get your point across.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm going to get to the questions here. I saw one in the chat box, which I want to start with, which is, do you think publishers are going to start shying away from publishing books that might be considered controversial? I have my opinion on that, but I want to hear from you. Do you see a drop in books that cover these topics, or do you think they're still being published in as great a numbers as ever?
I think we still have an explosion in publishing of diverse voices. And we were just at ALA and I brought home a tower of books. And my husband and I went through them and he was like, well, that one's going to be challenged. That one's going to be challenged. That one's going to be challenged. But that's a good thing. It's not a good thing, but I mean, it shows how many books are addressing topics still. And I know in my conversations with a couple of publishers, they're like, no, we're not.
Yeah.
We're standing up to this. It's important.
Sure.
We're not going to
bow down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I
exactly
agree.
what I was going to say. Yes, I don't think you need to worry about that, authors. So here's a question from Amy. What is your approach regarding books that encourage hatred and or narrow social views, if you find those books on your shelf?
So nothing comes to mind, but what I can say is that I have to wonder if there's something, I don't know that necessarily encourages hatred, but that perhaps has a narrow or maybe a viewpoint that maybe is no longer the norm, that perhaps maybe that's a book that probably shouldn't be and should be in the library, that maybe should be read, because I think that's something, we as librarians don't really talk a whole lot about just the public in general, but part of the job of collection development not only is curating new books that maybe fulfill the areas of curriculum or the subject needs and for research and that sort of thing too. We also need to be sure that we are curating a collection that's meaningful, that's up to date, that doesn't have outdated information, and that includes outdated terms, references. The first that comes to mind are maybe indigenous people. There's a lot of books that still refer to them in a negative way, in a negative light, and so if those books are still in the library, that's problematic. Another topic that I think about is like the Tulsa race massacre. It's now referred officially as a massacre, so there could be some books out there that don't reference it as a massacre. So I think you have to think about, as librarians, are we maintaining a collection that's relevant, but it's also timely and it's not dated. So
and take this out of that context. I mean, we do this all the time, right? So when Pluto changed, we had to take out the books on Pluto and replace them. This is not something just applying to current culture topics and so on and so forth. I also think we have books like Opposing Viewpoints, which is a series, and Current Controversies, which have many sides of a topic, and they have hundreds of titles about different things, where you have essays on all sides of a topic. So sometimes we do have materials like that because they're exploring something from 5 different lenses to help student readers understand how different people think about a nonfiction kind of a topic. So hopefully that touches on the question.
I also would like to add one last thing. I think about our friend, we've got a mutual friend, Jennifer Lagarde, who's a librarian, and she recently she does a lot of, has published a couple books about misinformation, disinformation. And she recently mentioned, that yes, there might be 2 sides to every story, but not every side has earned the right of that critical debate. And I think about the Holocaust, we're not going to have the other side, and so we have to really think through that lens. And so, yes, we know that that's a topic that's come up for debate in different state legislators. And that's what happens sometimes when there are people that are trying to restrict access and they're not looking through the lens of a professional, and now they're saying like, oh yeah, well, we don't want to do that. Well, there's recordings of school districts that saying, yes, we have to have both sides of the Holocaust. And there's just these horrified gasps of teachers that are saying, what? So we have to really be careful, because there's no one size fits all for everything, so.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And also the role of school libraries is a little different than the role of public libraries.
Right.
I imagine public libraries have a lot more books on their shelves that might be outdated because they first of all, they have more space in general than a school library does. And the school library, it's part of the school's or child's educational experience. And so I'm just guessing here, there's a slightly different.
Well, there is a different take too, and
Mhm.
the kinds of, like, in my
Mission and
library,
vision.
I would buy biographies of political figures, for example. In the public library, they would also buy commentary books, like on those political figures,
Yeah.
like, someone ranting this direction or that direction, and both. But that's not typically
Mhm.
something in a
Mhm.
school we would have, because we're really focused more on just the information that we're providing
Mhm.
students. That's not to say that would never happen. We
Right.
have essays by different commentators and stuff at the high school library, because kids are in AP programs, they're going to college, they need to see people have different points of view. But
Yeah.
but that's just an example of how their collection would be different than ours.
Mhm.
And while they're bigger, it's like I tell everybody, and I think a public library would agree with this. Like, we are not an archive. We are not going to keep books forever. We don't have the space.
Yeah.
And there's just so many great books, even though we have digital too, but I mean, I think we just can't keep everything. It's not
Mhm.
realistic.
True. Well, and to follow up on that, I got a question here. So the Little House on the Prairie books, they've been under controversy lately because of their, sort of outdated depiction of Native Americans. How do you handle a book like that? That's a tough one, I imagine.
So I'll take that. Yes. So that was for me like an iconic series of books. I received them as a gift as a child and loved them. I mean, but when you read them, when you're more knowledgeable, you're like, oh my gosh, So that said, I know personally as a coordinator, I've never deliberately said you have to take that book out of the library. I would never do that, because we know some kids might read it. I mean, but I think the question I ask is more, is it getting used if you have it? Is it being checked out?
Right.
One of the things we know is that there are so many new books that it's very hard for our older books that don't have updated covers to compete. So then fast forward to now, I think of the book Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park. I read that book and I love that book. It's a great alternative, and so when I, like me, I oversee 42 campuses, 29 of which are elementary schools. And so some of the guidance I give to librarians when we open a new school, which we open a new elementary about every year, we have conversations as we build this collection and a new collection, and we spend over $150,000 on books to open a library, an elementary library. And so what I say to them is that I'm okay with you purchasing what we might call a classic or core collection, but I always tell them too, but I'm not making you. I don't want you to think about, because I want you to think about how relevant and up to date it's going to be, but then also too, if a person really wants a book that's older, I bet it's somewhere in the district and you can interlibrary loan it if you need to.
Yes.
So I really want kids to not have to look through so many old books to find the newest of the new. It's kind of like, again, reference to weeding, so if it's got an updated cover and it's still being read, great, let's get it, but don't just buy it because it's a past award-winning book. I mean, we're not going to buy all the Caldecotts or all the Newberries because some of them are really old and some of them are not getting checked out. We just don't have that philosophy anymore. Plus also, we only have so much money and we're wanting to maximize, the dollar and be fiscally efficient for our taxpayers too. So,
but I would add, think of titles like Merchant of Venice.
Yeah.
By Shakespeare. So we're not going to take out the completed works of Shakespeare out of the library because of the titles and the views of that day. So I think part of it is having other books that make critical commentary about it, or other resources like, literary databases where students can learn more about the author, or critical biographies of Laura Ingalls, or not critical, but, more analytical.
Sure. Well, and being able to
ways to handle that also allow you to deal with difficult histories.
Having a discussion, putting it in context, saying she was a product of her time, this is why she uses these terms. I mean, you can do a lot with it, but it takes effort on part of the teacher, the librarian, or the parent to have these discussions. Sure. Yeah. Sheila asks, so, and we touched on this a little bit, how can people in cities and states with so far more tolerant policies help library systems in places that are more challenged? So we talked about, you know, using social media and that kind of thing. Are there anything that we can do to directly help you in Texas, for example, if we're not in Texas?
We are tired. Librarians in Texas are exhausted. You know, the state had struggles over masks, and then they had, you know, struggles over opening schools, and then all of the DI curriculums, social emotional learning contents being challenged, book challenges. People are really exhausted. So if you're in a state that's not dealing with it, you know, if you can think of ways to send, you know, emotional support, if you really feel compelled to do something and you want to contact people like us or Texans Right to Read and say, you know, I can write a letter to the editor. I can, you know, I can create a slideshow about censorship. I can create some graphics that can go on someone's website, whatever.
Mhm.
I can do some research on this title, you know, anything like that saves one of us from having to lift that load. And I also just think the moral support coming into librarians in Texas, Florida, I know Pennsylvania's had some struggles, Ohio, Iowa, you know, it's scattered around. A lot of the South Georgia is having a lot of issues. So I just think anything that supports librarians in those places, Louisiana, is helps. Moral support helps a lot.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, what I tell people, don't underestimate the impact of a card, a note, a tweet that just says, I love my librarian because she or he, you know, insert, you know, whatever. I mean, those things, they get retweeted and shared, and they just go a long way.
Yeah.
I mean, because especially after you've just been beaten down by so many negative things that have been happening. So
yeah, a $5 Amazon card, like any
yeah, just
a note, just any recognition.
Sure.
Helpful, as well as helping people with resources. That's always appreciated.
Of course. Well, and another thing, we had a guest on a couple months ago, an author who is spreading the word about how school librarians, their jobs are just being cut like crazy around the country because of budget cuts. And a lot of parents don't even realize they don't have a full-time librarian at their kid's school. The person you see checking out is a teacher who's just checking out books in her free hour, helping out, or a parent volunteering. And I think just being aware of that and supporting whatever budget, you know, allowances we need to keep librarians' jobs is so important. And you can do that by voting for bond issues or you know, signing the petition saying, yes, we need to keep our librarians in schools, because you serve such an important purpose. And you are specially trained to do it, and people don't always understand that.
Right, and the irony of all that is that the districts that had librarians in place, even when districts have asked their librarians to do things we don't consider within our professional standards, we've been there for those principals and superintendents to talk to about how do we handle this? What do we do if people come in with a complaint? How are we going to order these books? What are the journals you use to, you know, we're there to ask all those questions to. Some places that are getting challenges don't have librarians. And so how are they juggling all of this? We're huge resources for districts. And so, and, you know, we're seeing this crop up even in, there was a challenge, a library in Long Island recently that had pulled all their Pride books. So you don't know where this is going to crop up, because it's sort of, I like to go to California, and if you've been there, the eucalyptus trees cause problems when they have fires because they're super tall and super flammable, and the flames jump from the top of the tree to the top of the tree. Well, right now that's what's happening. We're like, it's jumping over the road because it's just going from the top of the tree to top of the tree on social media. And so you don't even know where these challenges are going to end up.
Next, yeah. So true.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let you go now. We so appreciate your efforts and all your work. And just to reassure the writers here, this is not keeping you from stocking their books in your library if they meet the parameters of your school. Is that correct? Even if their topics might be considered controversial?
Right. And, there are a lot of districts that are facing challenges but are following their policies to the letter.
Yes, yes.
Becky being an example of that. And so there are districts that are facing challenges and their districts aren't following their policies and books are getting removed. But despite all the pressure, many districts have mostly adhered to their policies and most things have stayed on the shelf with some extreme exceptions that are very disturbing.
Yeah.
So it's still a fight. So yes, libraries will have your books on the shelf.
Yes.
But you are exhausted. We understand that. And so I urge everyone listening to this here tonight and on replay to do what you can to help and to spread the word throughout the Kidlit community, because we can make a difference in this fight.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much for all your hard work and for being here with us tonight and talking about this. I appreciate your time very much.
Thank you for having us. I've been reading all the comments too. Thanks to everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Enjoyed the time together.
Thanks. And for those of you who are regulars, we are taking August off of the Kidlit Social because we will be on vacation. So we will see you in September, but we will send out an email about that. So thank you all. Have a great evening. Have a great rest of your summer, and we will see you in the fall. Good night, everybody.